It's hard to imagine the silence before you hear it. That deep, slow exhale of something breathing through mist. You look ahead across a flat, frozen plain, and a figure takes shape. It isn't an elephant, though it seems familiar. The first thing that hits you is scale. Standing there in the low winter light is a woolly mammoth. Mammothus primigenius, the northern giant that once ruled the cold edge of the Ice Age world. The animal's shoulders would reach almost 4 meters high. The largest males could weigh between 6 and 8 metric tons, heavier than a modern African bull elephant. Its back slopes sharply downward from a high, muscular shoulder ridge. That ridge wasn't random. It was made of tall spines of vertebrae supporting massive fat and muscle stores needed to survive months of bitter cold. Your eyes follow the curved tusks, each one an arc more than 3 meters long, sometimes spiral-shaped, sometimes slightly twisted depending on age and wear. No other elephant species has tusks quite like that. If you were to walk closer, slowly, quietly, you'd notice its fur wasn't uniform. Excavations in Siberia, Russia, and Alaska have given us more than bones. They've given us frozen coats still matted with Ice Age dust. The outer layer of the mammoth's hair could reach nearly 1 meter in length, coarse and dark cinnamon or reddish brown, while underneath was a soft undercoat the color of wheat or dusty gold. Microscopic analysis of hair pigments shows variation. Not all mammoths were brown. Some had lighter shades, even blonde. Beneath all that hair, their skin was dark and thick, about 1 inch in some places, stronger than a car tire's rubber. And as strange as it sounds now, the world they belonged to wasn't covered by glaciers everywhere. Most of their lives unfolded on open grasslands called the Mammoth Steppe, a cold, dry mix of grasses, sage, moss, and sedge stretching from Spain to Canada. It was one of the largest ecosystems in Earth's history. Permafrost cores and pollen data show that summers were short but surprisingly green, dense with plants packed with nutrients. These plains weren't silent deserts but lightly buzzing with insects, grazing reindeer, musk oxen, horses, and the occasional cave lion, waiting near a frozen ridge. The air close to the mammoth would smell faintly of dry grass and damp earth. You might see steam rising from its nostrils in rhythmic waves. Its ears look small, nearly half the size of those on African elephants. That's an adaptation to prevent heat loss in freezing temperatures. Its tail is short for the same reason. Every detail of its body speaks of cold climate efficiency. Shorter extremities, thicker fat layer, long insulating hair, and even slightly smaller surface area to retain warmth. If you watched it move across the plain, you'd never call it clumsy. Studies of fossilized tracks in Yakutia and Alaska show steady pacing, footfalls in near-perfect alignment. Like elephants today, mammoths walked on tiptoe inside cushiony, padded feet, more like walking on soft mattresses than stomping. Their step left circular depressions pressed 5 to 7 centimeters deep into permafrost sediment, still visible after thousands of years. That tells us their gait was deliberate, weight distributed evenly, not pounding. In the low light of Arctic dawn, a herd might move silently behind the first one you saw, matriarchs guiding younger calves through the wind. Footprint clusters found near former riverbeds show distinct size groupings, evidence that mammoths, like their modern cousins, lived in social female-led groups with offspring clustering near the center. The males, larger and more solitary, roamed edges or traveled alone. The oldest and most experienced females steered the migration paths, likely remembering where grass sprouted first when snow began to thaw. If you're standing there in the permafrost wind, your breath freezing in front of you, you might think about how recently, geologically speaking, this meeting could have happened. The first Homo sapiens to step into northern Eurasia might have seen this same site about 40,000 years ago. Humans weren't everywhere yet, but stone tools and mammoth bones found together in Ukraine and Siberia show they shared the same space. Those early people knew this creature as food, shelter, and spirit. To them, it wasn't an ancient fossil. It was a presence towering above the steppe grass. For scale, if you stood near one, the top of your head might barely reach its lower shoulder. Its shaggy belly hair would brush your face if you dared to come close enough. You'd feel the heat radiating through its fur, a slow pulse of life adapted completely to cold, running through veins thick as ropes. And when it exhaled, that cloud of warm vapor could briefly hide its face before the wind swept it away again. For a mammoth, every part of the body worked like a cold weather machine. Behind its scruffy head was a layer of fat, known as the nuchal hump, essentially biological insulation. Its trunk, longer than modern elephants, served as a frostproof tool, flexible enough to pluck snow aside or gather grass from beneath ice. Chemical traces found in preserved trunks show salt residues from licking minerals out of frozen ground. Through DNA sequencing, scientists confirmed that mammoths had special genes for producing subcutaneous fat, similar to those in Arctic whales. Evolution had sculpted perfection for temperature control. If you were to touch its tusks, polished from years of use, they'd feel colder than stone. Growth rings inside those tusks tell the story of climate swings through the mammoth's lifetime, sometimes reflecting stress winters when food was scarce. Each ring corresponds to periods of growth, and by counting them, scientists can estimate ages. Many lived 40 to 60 years, long enough to witness glacial cycles rising and falling around them. And what might a mammoth notice about you? Perhaps nothing threatening at first. Bones of entire herds found intact suggest mammoths didn't always fear early humans. That changed slowly when human hunters learned precision, organization, and weapon use. But in this quiet first moment, the animal might only pause, ears twitching, trunk lifted to catch wind direction. The evidence for their awareness, seismic hearing similar to elephants, means they might have sensed your footsteps from far away through vibrations. Studies of elephant infrasound and skull resonance show that low-frequency calls can travel over 10 kilometers. The same bone structures appear in mammoth skull fossils, especially the enlarged air chambers in their heads. Sound for them was as tactile as sight for you. Ancient DNA from frozen specimens in Siberia reveals another subtle truth. Mammoths weren't all the same. There were genetic variations in size and fur type depending on region. The so-called steppe mammoth, their earlier ancestor, was even larger. By the time Mammuthus primigenius emerged, its evolution was nearly perfect for periglacial life. Less tall, but compact, sound, insulated. When paleontologists defrosted the baby mammoth Liuba in 2007, perfectly preserved in the Siberian Yamal Peninsula, her tiny trunk still contained milk residue and traces of pollen. That single discovery confirmed countless deductions about what these animals really looked like up close. Liuba's eyelashes were still there, her skin still creased. Through her, the abstract became immediate. The mammoth stopped being an icon and turned once again into a living creature, only frozen in time. And honestly, when I look at those preserved images, it's strange to think that such huge beings once moved where cities now stand. The bones beneath modern meadows and highways still hold carbon that once cycled through their lungs. Their story isn't distant, it's underfoot, which is why some people linger on their memory. There's something humbling about imagining those silent forms on frozen steppes, wrapped in fur, breathing clouds into the air. It's peaceful and a little haunting. Fascinating, really. Now, if you keep watching long enough, you'll notice the herd drift away. Dust from their steppes glows faintly in the low sun as snow settles again. The wind slows. One mammoth turns back just once, lowering its trunk toward the frozen ground, as if listening for something still buried beneath the ice. And then, everything grows quiet, stretching endlessly across the Pleistocene plain. You've seen the mammoth up close. Its fur, its eyes, the breath that turns to fog. Now maybe it's time to look behind the animal, to the vast place it called home. Because mammoths didn't belong to just one patch of land. They covered an empire of cold that stretched almost halfway around the planet. Scientists can trace that territory not from imagination, but from maps drawn using bones, teeth, and ancient pollen. Their fossils mark paths from Western Europe through Siberia and across the Bering Land Bridge into Alaska and the central plains of North America. Some even reach south into what's now Kansas and Spain. If you loaded all confirmed mammoth dig sites on a single globe, there'd be white dots circling the top of the world like a necklace made of ice. None of that is guesswork. Radiocarbon dating shows these bones appearing again and again between about 120,000 and 10,000 years ago. They lived across what researchers call the Mammoth Steppe, or the steppe tundra. This wasn't empty frozen ground. It was one of the richest biomes in the late Pleistocene, covering millions of square kilometers at the edge of the glaciers. Permafrost cores drilled throughout Eurasia show layers packed with ancient pollen grains, tiny time capsules, telling us that grasses dominated there. Sagebrush, sedges, and hardy herbs blended into low mats of vegetation, adapted to dry winds and cold light. Compared to today's Arctic tundra, which is damp and mossy, the Mammoth Steppe was actually drier, firmer, and easier to walk across. Fossilized dung samples confirm the landscape provided plenty of graze, even in the colder months. Modern scientists know what grew there by analyzing isotopes in the soil, and even in the mammoth's bones. Ratios of carbon and nitrogen isotopes act like a signature of the plant communities these animals fed on. The chemistry proves their diet was shaped by an open grassland environment with relatively low moisture, not by swampy or forested terrain. It's hard to picture now, because those regions today look like snowfields or tundra wetlands. But 10 or 15,000 years ago, much of northern Eurasia looked more like a rough, dry meadow under pale skies. If you could float above it then, you'd see far-flung herds of different animals scattered over an ocean of grass: bison, horses, woolly rhinoceroses, and musk oxen, all adapted to the same cold steppe ecosystem. Mammoths shared watering places with them, likely migrating along predictable routes. We know this from oxygen isotope ratios recorded inside mammoth tusks. As tusks grow continuously throughout life, they trap data about temperature and water sources each season. Alternating patterns show cycles of cold and mild periods, physical evidence of seasonal migration across long distances. Some tusks studied from Siberia and Yakutia show repeating warm-cold sequences, meaning the animal was traveling hundreds of kilometers between summer pastures and winter refuges. It's the same principle used to study whales today, just applied to fossil ivory instead of modern teeth. Researchers can even tell when a mammoth drank snowmelt or river water, because the isotopic oxygen differs slightly. That's how specific our view has become. Each tusk reads almost like a journal of its owner's travels. Landscapes varied, of course. In Western Europe, mammoths grazed mixed grassland and birch forest edges. In North America, they roamed the so-called Mammoth Corridor, stretching through present-day Yukon down to the Great Plains. The Hot Springs Mammoth site in South Dakota remains one of the clearest windows into that world. A collapsed sinkhole turned natural trap where dozens of mammoths slipped in over centuries. Their preserved skeletons still show layers of silt marking ancient seasonal floods. The alignment of remains helps confirm that young males were especially prone to accidents when traveling alone, consistent with herd behavior inferred from modern elephant dynamics. Across the ocean, the Berelek site in Siberia tells another part of the story. Found near the Indigirka River, it holds bones from more than 140 individual mammoths, mixed with evidence of human presence. Stone tools, cup marks, burned material. Radiocarbon dates cluster around 12,000 years ago, near the species' mainland disappearance. These concentrated bone deposits could reflect natural death sites, or maybe early butchering areas near frozen channels. Either way, Berelek confirms that mammoth herds were still abundant as the Ice Age drew its final breath. Scientists also look beyond the bones to reconstruct the environment itself. The chemical composition of wind-blown dust, or loess, found in steppe layers reveals patterns of aridity and cold. Those data show the mammoth steppe's climate once swung between deep freezes and dry, mild pulses, similar to a Siberian prairie rather than an Antarctic desert. Even the texture of soil within permafrost cores tells a story. The presence of ice wedges, fine silt, and frost-cracked ground structures shows that, while cold, the land wasn't buried under glacial caps. It was habitable, walkable, and full of life. Though tundra, birch, and willow crept in during warmer interglacial periods, open grass always returned when temperatures dropped again. That repeated rhythm, expansion of grassland, then retraction, defined their world for hundreds of thousands of years. And through those cycles, mammoths adapted beautifully. Hair grew thicker, body shape more compact, metabolism tuned to endurance rather than speed. Nothing about their range was accidental. It was the combined output of climate, vegetation, and slow patience. When researchers mapped the last surviving populations, they found isolated refuges in places like Wrangel Island off Siberia and St. Paul Island in Alaska. These were leftover fragments of the great steppe world, cut off by rising seas. The animals persisted there for millennia after the mainland herds disappeared, proof of how well they matched their surroundings. Wrangel's fossils, only about 4,000 years old, show smaller mammoths, likely due to limited resources. An example of what scientists call island dwarfism. If you try to imagine what their migrations felt like, thousands of tons of mammals walking in a slow, collective rhythm over endless grass, you can almost hear the wind carrying dry snowflakes across frozen soil. Researchers once compared the productivity of the mammoth steppe to modern Serengeti grasslands. Despite its coldness, it may have supported equal biomass per square kilometre. That means food was plentiful enough to sustain vast numbers of herbivores, just built for cold instead of heat. The evidence for these immense ranges keeps expanding. As permafrost melts today, new sites emerge every summer. Old ivory, skulls, fragments rising out of thawing banks. Radiocarbon labs in Russia, Canada, and Sweden constantly refine the timeline of where and when mammoths roamed. The latest consensus paints a world interconnected by climate rather than geography. A single vast ecological belt that wrapped the upper northern hemisphere. And personally, I find that thought oddly comforting. That cold grasslands once connected so much of Earth. It means that what seems separate now once moved together under simpler conditions. The mammoth didn't just survive in harshness. It thrived wherever land met wind. And hey, subscribe if you want to. More boring facts are here whenever you need them. You'll always know where to find Keeper of Sleep when you can't sleep. Because if you lie back and think about it, the long ridges of frozen loam, the smell of dry grass crushed under hooves, the faint crunch of snow, you realize the mammoth's true kingdom wasn't ice or snow, but the in-between space, the cold, bright plain that seemed to go on forever. That's where it lived, and where its memory still rests, quiet and massive under the ground. After picturing where mammoths roamed, those endless plains of pale grass and dry wind, it's easy to wonder what kept all that weight alive. 8 tons of life needs a lot of food every single day. The answer, as scientists found again and again, is simple: grass. Not the soft domestic kind you see on lawns, but the resilient Arctic sort that could sprout through frost and survive half the year under snow. When mammoth carcasses were first discovered with preserved stomachs, the remains left little doubt. Inside one specimen found near the Berezovka River in Siberia, explorers excavated tufts of half-chewed grass, still green from the Ice Age cold. Later analysis identified a mix of sedges, herbs and flowering plants called forbs, narrow-leafed Arctic herbs rich in protein, along with bits of willow and other tundra vegetation. Similar remains in permafrost-stored mammoths, like Liuba. The baby female discovered in 2007 showed a near-identical pattern. Grasses dominated, not shrub leaves or bark. Stable isotope measurements have backed this up with numbers. Carbon-13 and nitrogen-15 ratios in mammoth collagen clearly indicate a diet based on C3 grasses, the kind that grow in cool, dry regions. These same isotopic fingerprints appear across specimens from Europe, Siberia, and Alaska, meaning no matter where they lived, mammoths fed mostly on tough meadow plants. That consistency tells scientists how uniform the steppe world really was. One giant cafeteria of frozen grass stretching across continents. Their teeth were built for that life. Each mammoth molar could weigh more than 2 kilograms and carry up to 26 enamel ridges lined like file drawers. Those enamel plates acted as a grinding surface optimized for wear resistance. As grasses contain silicon particles, phytoliths, tiny glassy grains that erode enamel, mammoth molars constantly wore down. When one tooth ground itself to smoothness, the next molar in line rose from the jaw to replace it. Over a lifetime, they cycled through 6 sets, similar to elephants today. When the last pair wore out, the animal could no longer graze efficiently. Many died then, not from predators, but from hunger. It's a strangely quiet, practical end. If you watched one feeding, it wouldn't look impressive. Just steady and repetitive. Step, pull, chew, breathe, move. Studies comparing energy needs with modern elephants suggest a mammoth easily consumed between 150 and 300 kilograms of vegetation per day. To do that required near constant feeding, up to 18 or 20 hours within every 24-hour cycle. The rest of the time was for walking or sleeping standing up, swaying slightly to keep warm in the wind. The mammoth's trunk played the role of harvester. Muscle reconstruction from preserved trunks shows thousands of fine muscle fibers similar to those in elephants. giving enough control to pluck single stems even under frost. They use the trunk both as a rake and a shovel, scraping away snow to reach grass at ground level, then curling the gathered clumps into their mouths. Worn tusk tips often show polishing from that motion, suggesting they doubled as snow clearers, sweeping aside crusted ice. In the permafrost record, flattened snowy patches around fossil trackways sometimes appear alongside fossil droppings, likely the remains of grazing plots from long ago. To learn exactly what those animals chewed, researchers now examine microscopic plant remains found trapped between fossil teeth. Those tiny silica bodies, phytoliths again, still bear shapes identifiable to species. Amazingly, they match the steppe grasses you'd find today in parts of Mongolia and Alaska: feathergrass, fescue, Arctic bluegrass, and hardy sedges. The more scientists looked, the clearer it became that mammoths didn't depend on trees or leaves. They lived almost entirely off low, sun-stressed vegetation, growing just centimeters above frozen soil. There are even small clues of variety. Some sites show traces of yarrow, wild pea, and Arctic poppy seeds inside fossilized dung. These seasonal elements suggest mammoths adjusted diets with the brief summer bloom. Warm months brought richer nutrients, while winter meant digging for dry sedge and coarse grass stems. That shift appears in isotopic signals recorded within tusks, subtle variations hinting when plants changed nutrient content as sunlight returned. Modern elephants switch between browsing, eating trees and shrubs, and grazing, eating grass, depending on what's available. Mammoths tilted almost entirely toward grazing, a singular focus that suited the open plains but made them dependent on broad, stable grasslands. As climate warmed near the end of the Ice Age and shrubs began reclaiming those meadows, their main food source thinned. That change, traced through pollen and dung analysis, marked the beginning of their nutritional stress. Still, the feeding itself must have been strangely rhythmic, a whole landscape breathing in sync with their chewing. Imagine a herd of 20 or 30 adults spreading slowly across a dry field, each trunk curling down, lifting, chewing, stepping forward a few meters, then doing it again. Every sound muffled by snow, every movement patient. It's easy to see why those plains stayed trimmed like natural lawns year after year. Chemical studies of tusk growth also help estimate movement between feeding grounds. Variations in oxygen isotopes correspond to water intake differences across seasons. The repeating cycle, year after year, shows they followed ancient routes between known sources, likely rivers and thawing puddles fed by glacier melt. For a mammoth, good grass always lay near steady water, even if it froze half the year. Sometimes these traces appear in odd places. Cores from Siberian permafrost show traces of nitrogen spikes tied to vast herbivore herds fertilizing the soil. Mammoths, by constantly grazing and cycling nutrients, actually reshaped their ecosystem. Some ecologists now credit them with maintaining the steppe itself, creating what is called grazer ecosystem stability. Without these heavy consumers, the ground later reverted to moss and soggier tundra. And honestly, that's the most fascinating part. How something so large could keep its world balanced just by eating continuously and moving on. And hey, subscribe if you want to. More boring facts are here whenever you need them. You'll always know where to find Keeper of Sleep when you can't sleep. The image of a single mammoth is impressive, but it's the herd that tells the real story. They lived, most of them, not as loners, but as families. Slow-moving, tightly linked groups spread across the windswept grass. And wherever we find their fossils, The patterns repeat with quiet precision, showing the order of their social world. Bone beds, those silent collections of skeletons stacked in Ice Age soil, reveal more than death. They show relationships. At places like Berelek in Siberia and Hot Springs in South Dakota, hundreds of bones lie mingled together, sorted by size and age. Adults, juveniles, and calves appear in natural groups, sometimes aligned in ways suggesting they died together, surrounded by kin. That clustering isn't random. It echoes the family herds we see today among elephants. Matriarchs leading females, daughters, and calves forward, while adolescent males drift off into solitude after their teenage years. For the woolly mammoth, scientists reconstruct a similar society. The matriarch, often the oldest female, probably held the memory of roots, where the rivers froze safely, where the summer grass came early, where storms could be avoided. Younger females formed the core circle around her. Calves stayed underfoot, shielded quite literally by a wall of massive legs whenever predators drew near. It's more than guesswork. The sizes of trackways found in Siberian fossil soils sometimes show small footprints surrounded by larger ones in consistent patterns. A ring of adults around young, frozen into the earth since the Pleistocene. Gestation for the mammoth would have lasted around 22 months, almost identical to modern elephants. That estimate comes from body size and metabolic scaling models, combined with embryonic development data from elephant reproduction. The longer the gestation, the more fully formed the newborn. Important in a landscape where survival depended on steadiness, not speed. A newborn mammoth likely weighed about 90 kilograms, already standing nearly a meter tall within minutes after birth. Its skin, still hairless at first, thickened and grew fur over the first months. The mother's milk, rich and high in fat, supported rapid growth until the calf could graze. Raising a calf in Ice Age conditions meant nearly constant vigilance. Fossil evidence of bite marks on young bones, attributed to large carnivores like cave lions and wolves, reminds us how vulnerable the smallest members were. The herd structure functioned as both daycare and defense. Like elephants today, older females probably helped new mothers by encircling them during birth, keeping the calf close in the bitter wind. Archaeologists examining ancient tusks even found scraping marks showing how calves experimented with using their trunks. Practice strokes left on ice or soil near herd resting areas. As years passed, the social rhythm never stopped. Calves stayed near their mothers for as long as a decade, learning routes, the feel of safe river ice, the scent of useful plants. Then, as puberty approached, the young males began to separate, spending more and more time on the edges of the group until eventually leaving entirely. Some bone sites show an overrepresentation of young adult males, a sign that once alone, they faced more accidents and predation. It happens today with elephants, who wander solitary until occasionally joining groups during breeding seasons. Mammoths seem to have lived by the same cycle. When males reached maturity, around 15 years, they entered musth, a hormonal state marked by heightened testosterone, signaling readiness to mate. The telltale gland openings on the sides of the skull appear in fossilized adult males. Their tusks show wear likely associated with combat, consistent with tusk-locking fights observed in modern elephants. Despite those clashes, the herd's overall dynamic remained calm. Females likely bred only every 4 to 6 years, allowing calves to grow strong before new ones arrived. That slow reproduction rate partly explains why mammoth populations recovered poorly from large losses. It's the rhythm of giants who grew and replaced themselves very gradually. Stable isotope studies even reflect maternal bonds. Calves' teeth show distinct oxygen and nitrogen isotope patterns, indicating prolonged milk consumption for several years. The weaning curve aligns perfectly with modern elephant data, reinforcing the idea that motherhood was long, patient, and protective. Sometimes entire family units ended together. At the Stambach and Duvanillard sites, bones of different ages lie side by side under layers of frozen soil, suggesting seasonal flooding or sudden climate events caught herds in motion. The circular arrangement of skeletons often shows adults facing inward, a frozen echo of defense. It isn't poetic invention. Excavation logs describe it clearly. Even in death, the herd's logic survived. And yet, for all that structure, they weren't rigid creatures. The mammoth social world had room for gentleness. Where patterns on tusk tips differ between sexes, females use them to move snow tenderly when helping calves feed, while males' tusks show lateral striations from jostling and sparring. Everything about those traces whispers routine life, teaching, nudging, waiting. It's interesting to imagine the emotional world behind it. Elephants today show grief and recognition of their dead. Bones of mammoths with signs of manipulation, tusks rearranged, skulls turned upright, might represent early behavior of that kind, though scientists still debate it. There's no firm proof, but the possibility stays there, hovering quietly. If you wandered close to such a herd, you'd notice the calm order more than noise. The sounds would come soft, breathing, low rumbles near the threshold of hearing, perhaps vibrations through the ground rather than in the air. Those subsonic calls, inferred from skull structure similar to elephants, could travel kilometers, linking herds across plains. It was their long-distance family conversation, inaudible to the predators that tracked them. And so, the mammoth family wasn't just biology. It was geography with memory built in. Mothers teaching roots their mothers had known for centuries. In one Siberian study, tusk isotopes showed repeated migration paths over generations. The same valleys, the same rivers. Each herd followed almost exact footprints of their ancestors, century after century, as though loyalty to the land itself could be inherited. Family, for them, was everything. Structure, safety, map, and legacy, all in one. And hey, subscribe if you want to. More boring facts are here whenever you need them. You'll always know where to find Keeper of Sleep when you can't sleep. It's gentle to think of them this way, not as relics, but as living circles of memory pressed quietly into frost. Somewhere beneath Siberia's soil, those circles still rest. Mothers, calves, and siblings lying where they last stood together, under layers of silence and time. Generation by generation, the pattern continues, unbroken now except in bone and dust. Even giants like mammoths lived by the quiet laws of risk. Size didn't make them invincible. It only bought them time. Longer strides between dangers, thicker skin against cold, and maybe a little more patience when the world pressed close. But the Ice Age wasn't gentle. It tested everything that tried to survive, from the smallest vole to the largest tusked grazer. Predators followed them, just as they follow large herbivores today. The main hunters of the Pleistocene steppe were wolves, not the lean, grey kind we know now, but heavy-boned, powerful ones built for endurance. Fossil skulls from Eastern Europe and Siberia show they had larger jaws and stronger teeth than modern wolves, able to pierce thick hide. They probably hunted in packs, selecting the weakened or the very young, using numbers rather than speed. The strategy works even now. Exhaustion succeeds where teeth alone cannot. Alongside them hunted the great cats. Cave lions, Panthera spalia, roamed the same territories. They were slightly larger than today's African lions, with longer legs for running in snow and sturdier chests for grappling prey. Their remains appear frequently in the same deposits as mammoths, especially near den sites where cub bones outnumber adults. Proof of active breeding populations. At Chauvet Cave in France, Paleolithic art even captures their presence. Sleek outlines with faint manes, rendered by hands that likely witnessed them hunt. Scientific studies of boneware suggest they dined on reindeer, horses, bison, and occasionally juvenile mammoths. Bite marks on mammoth calves' bones in Russian sites match the size and spacing of cave lion teeth. The third major predator was man. Though early in the timeline, humans were minor players compared to wolves and lions. Still, toward the end of the Pleistocene, where cut marks overlap with tooth marks, the picture grows crowded. These interactions form the last layer of the mammoth's threats, but their natural enemies, long before humans arrived in force, shaped their behavior already. Vigilance, traveling in groups, sheltering calves within rings of adults. Even after death, the mammoth's body drew attention. Hyenas, bears, ravens, and prehistoric scavengers trailed the herds. Arctic ground squirrels gnawed ivory for calcium, leaving scratch traces fossilized in tusk surfaces. The steppe ecosystem recycled everything. Nothing went to waste. It's why some bone beds contain partial carcasses stripped perfectly clean. Work of scavengers following migration routes, finishing what predators began. Some dangers, though, arrived without teeth. Environmental threats could undo even the strongest. Ice Age winters thickened without warning. When snow crusted over grass or froze into solid layers, mammoths faced starvation. The evidence appears in bone chemistry. Lower nitrogen isotopes during lean years, matched to climatic cold snaps recorded in ice cores. Individuals that died during those periods often show thinner fat deposits in frozen tissue. Thin ice itself was treacherous. At places like the Hot Springs site in South Dakota, a sinkhole disguised under shallow water became a natural trap. Animals stepped in, fell, and couldn't climb out. Over centuries, dozens of mammoths died the same way, their skeletons stacked like forgotten monuments. Some bones bear characteristic fractures on shoulder blades and ribs, exactly what you'd see in a heavy animal struggling to rise in slippery mud. Fossils across Siberia tell of quieter threats: parasites, bone infections, and simple wear. Microbiological studies of frozen specimens revealed nematodes in intestinal contents and traces of parasite eggs in fecal matter. Like modern elephants, mammoths probably coped with internal burdens most of their lives. Some bones exhibit osteomyelitis, inflammation from infection, leaving hollow lesions across joints. Others carry arthritic changes so severe that joints fused over time. You can imagine an elder limping slowly behind the herd, each step measured. Their tusks told stories of hardship too. Growth rings in ivory, when viewed microscopically, thicken unevenly during stress years, sometimes double or triple in winter layers, showing slowed metabolism. Across long sequences, scientists see repeating patterns: mild stress in typical winters, severe lines during known climatic plunges like the Younger Dryas. These were survival scars written in calcium. Fracture patterns reveal even more drama. Some tusks snapped mid-length, frozen mid-life injuries, perhaps caused by battles or falls. One famous specimen from Yakutia shows a healed crack, meaning the animal lived years after breaking a tusk nearly in half, adapting by shifting its feeding technique to the remaining side. Its strange resilience, visible even after tens of thousands of years. Sometimes danger came not in sudden violence, but in slow environmental drift. When permafrost thickened and plant diversity declined, herds had to travel farther. Longer migrations meant higher energy costs, more exposure, more calves lost en route. Tracks fossilized along riverbank clays show faded lines breaking off abruptly. Likely whole groups drowned crossing thawing channels. The mammoth steppe could give abundance one season, and lethal chill the next. Yet, despite all this, they managed for millennia. Their wide habitat meant that when local conditions worsened, others thrived elsewhere. Climate models show mammoths endured multiple glacial cycles by shifting ranges instead of disappearing. Only when warming accelerated and grasslands shrank faster than migration could compensate did their numbers truly collapse. The steppe had been their shield. When it waned, so did they. No matter how strong they were, accidents remained constant companions. Fossil ribs display healed punctures likely from other tusks. Skulls show depressions from inter-mammoth sparring. These bruises weren't fatal most of the time, just the cost of social life among giants. One male's pelvic injury even shows adaptive bone regrowth, suggesting an individual limped for years after a fall but survived. Their biology allowed recovery when possible. Thick blood, high fat, and extraordinary endurance in repairing damage. And if disease didn't strike at once, age eventually did. The final molar set wore down. Grinding slowed, weight dropped. A mammoth's end rarely came alone, though. Herd structure likely held around the aging individuals, keeping them near migration routes until they couldn't move further. Isolated skeletons found near river terraces may represent those last walks. Old animals separated naturally from their groups to rest until snow covered them. It's humbling to think how every force in that ecosystem, from predator fang to invisible worm, played its part. The mammoth survived almost 400,000 years through ice expansions, predators, plagues, and famine, because every muscle and instinct adapted to pressure. Only the sudden combination of human hunting and quick warming finally outran them. And hey, subscribe if you want to. More boring facts are here whenever you need them. You'll always know where to find Keeper of Sleep when you can't sleep. Picture it one last time. A single old mammoth moving slowly through the cold. The herd has drifted far ahead. Snow lifts around its knees. Its breath curls and vanishes. Each step sinks a little deeper, soft ground giving way to hidden frost water beneath. Somewhere nearby, wolves watch, but don't approach yet. The horizon glows faintly blue, wide and endless. The wind grows sharper, then quiet, and the great creature lowers its head, pushing forward into night. Alone, enormous, unbroken by everything the Ice Age could give. After all that time wandering through snow and wind, the mammoth's world finally met ours. Not as thunder or earthquake, but quietly. The step of a human across frozen soil, the breath of a different kind of endurance. Mammoths had roamed those plains for hundreds of thousands of years before we arrived. And yet, when we did, their story began to change in ways neither side could predict. The first meetings happened in open light. Hunters crossing the steppe, following herds of reindeer and bison, stumbling upon shapes so large they blurred the horizon. Archaeology gives us these moments in fragments. At sites scattered across Eurasia, places like Yana RHS in Siberia, Medzhirish in Ukraine, and Dolny Vesternik in the Czech Republic. Stone tools lie just centimeters from mammoth bones. Those layers date between 40,000 and 15,000 years ago, spanning the peak of the last glaciation. Radiocarbon clocks tick with patient precision, linking footprints of Homo sapiens to a world still dominated by giants. At first, people may have scavenged rather than hunted. Frozen carcasses trapped in riverbanks offered more meat than tribes could consume. But as technology advanced, new spear points of flint and bone, thrusting weapons designed for close pursuit. The balance shifted. Spear tips discovered embedded in mammoth ribs from sites like Udinovo and Kraków-Speisz tell an unmistakable story. Humans learned not just to follow mammoths, but to bring them down. Even then, it wasn't done out of malice. It was survival. A single adult mammoth could feed a small community for weeks. Its hide served as roofs, its bones as beams. And Medzhirish, circular foundations made entirely of mammoth bones, still stand after 15,000 years. Jawbones laid end to end, tusks forming arches. Hearths burn black inside those ancient ridges of ivory. Excavated residues of ash, bone fat, and pigment show these weren't random dumps. They were homes. In the Pleistocene, mammoth bones were architecture. The same record shows artistry alongside necessity. Deep inside the French cave of Rouffignac, nearly 100 line drawings of mammoths stretch across limestone walls. Some are delicate outlines made with fingertips or torch soot. Others were engraved with flint blades. Dating to more than 13,000 years ago, they reveal how deeply these animals impressed human imagination. At Chauvet, still older, mammoths appear alongside lions, bison, and rhinoceroses, all drawn by torchlight that flickered over their forms. It isn't just art, it's memory made visible, evidence that even as mammoths became prey, they were also icons. What makes the archaeology remarkable is how consistent it stays from France to Siberia. Everywhere you look, mammoth bones and human traces intertwine. In Eastern Europe, carved figurines dating to 23,000 years ago depict mammoths with accurate curves in their tusks. In Siberia's Berelek site, butchered bones carry cut marks spaced exactly like strokes from flint blades used to slice muscle and tendon. At Dolny Vestonis, red ochre dust found near bones suggests ritual or respect, an acknowledgement of something powerful being taken. And still, the encounter wasn't purely one-sided. Mammoths shaped humans too. The abundance of bone allowed early communities to settle longer, create more stable shelters, and develop storage habits. The fat and marrow provided calories critical for surviving cold seasons. Even musical instruments emerged from their remains. Flutes, fashioned from ivory fragments polished smooth. Each find brings us closer to understanding that this wasn't just predator and prey. It was coexistence on frozen ground. Our cousins, the Neanderthals, likely crossed paths with mammoths long before Homo sapiens did. Evidence from La Côte de Saint-Brelade on the island of Jersey shows signs of large animal hunting roughly 200,000 years ago. Layers of mammoth bones there bear cut marks, but no traces of burning, suggesting organized butchery by Neanderthal groups. They may have driven herds toward cliff edges, an early example of collective strategy. Later, when modern humans spread across the same continent, methods improved, but the principle remained: cooperation, patience, endurance. The integration of mammoths into human life grew deeper over time. Ivory became a medium for sculpture, ornament, and symbolism. The famous Venus figurines, small carvings representing the human form, were often shaped from mammoth ivory. So were beads, needles, and knife handles. Each artifact connects survival to creativity. The mammoth's body transformed into both tool and story. Archaeologists reading these layers notice how the timeline of art coincides with periods of climatic stress. As ice sheets thickened, people may have turned increasingly to mammoth resources, while simultaneously depicting them in caves as guardians, memories, or even deities. We can't know belief exactly, but the repetition of tusked silhouettes carved across Europe suggests reverence alongside utility. At North American sites like the Hot Springs area in South Dakota and the Dent site in Colorado, Clovis age projectile points rest beside mammoth bones. Radiocarbon dating places those encounters roughly 13,000 years ago, one of the last chapters in the mammoth story. Hunters here use spears with fluted bases, designs made for penetrating thick hide. Some ribs recovered still hold stone fragments, frozen testimony of close, dangerous hunts. When all these clues are assembled, the shelters, carvings, wounds, and footprints, a complete picture emerges. Humans and mammoths shared the same winds, the same campsites, the same caches of frozen water for generations. The steppe might have trembled under both their feet. For millennia, the relationship wove between dependence and respect. Genetic studies now reveal that some of the mammoths hunted then were already part of declining populations. Fluctuations in DNA diversity within the last 10,000 years show shrinking herd numbers long before extinction. Perhaps human pressure hastened what climate had already begun. No single spear ended the species, but multiplied over thousands of years. The encounters left a mark impossible to ignore. The exact balance between human impact and warming remains debated, yet both forces converged with perfect inevitability. Still, what lingers in these finds is something quieter than conflict. In caves where torchlight still blackens the ceilings, the mammoth looks calm. Not fleeing, not fighting. Just standing amid grazing lines or family groups. Whoever drew them knew them well, maybe even with familiarity born of rhythm, hunting, feeding, crafting, remembering. In that shared time, humans were simply another creature learning to endure the Ice Age like everything else. And hey, subscribe if you want to. More boring facts are here whenever you need them. You'll always know where to find Keeper of Sleep when you can't sleep. So when you picture it, a line of hunters moving through mist, their breath merging with the mammoths in the same cold air, you can sense the moment history tipped. The old world of animals and storm began to fold into ours. Footprints overlapped. Spears met skin. Firelight touched fur. From then on, the destiny of the mammoth would always carry a trace of human hands, quiet and irreversible, written into bone beneath the frozen plain. If you tried to imagine standing face to face with a mammoth, no tools, no tribe, just you and it, the scale of difference would settle over you like cold air. You wouldn't even fit into its world properly. Every breath it took contained more air than you could exhale in several minutes. Every step covered the distance of a small room. It wasn't just big. It belonged to another league of biology entirely. A full-grown woolly mammoth weighed between 6 and 8 tons, about as much as 4 pickup trucks pressed into a single body. Its shoulders rose almost 4 meters high. Its heart, if measured like that of a modern elephant, likely weighed close to 20 kilograms and could pump more than 400 liters of blood in a single minute. Your entire vascular system would look fragile beside that machinery. Beneath the long fur and fat, its muscles wrapped around a dense skeleton built for cold pressure and endurance. Biomechanical models drawn from complete skeletons show how those muscles attached to towering spines at the shoulder. They worked like cranes, lifting the head and tusks that could each weigh over 100 kilograms. Even lowering them to the ground took effort, which is why the upper back formed that recognizable hump, the seat of raw power. In contrast, your spine balances weight upright and lean. A mammoth's body moved horizontally, stabilizing mass over 4 broad columns of bone. The comparison is more like comparing a suspension bridge to a folding chair. If you tried movement against it, you'd realize another scale of difference. A good human sprinter can reach 36 kilometers per hour, but only for a handful of seconds. A mammoth's estimated top speed, drawn from limb proportions and ground pressure analysis, was around 25 kilometers per hour. But it could hold 10 or 12 kilometers per hour for hours without tiring. Its stride measured over 1.5 meters, feet rising and falling on dense pads that spread weight across frozen ground. Foot pressure was about 20 to 25 psi, lighter than a human heel print because the area was enormous. That's why they didn't sink as easily into snow despite their mass. Meanwhile, you'd be knee-deep and slow within minutes. Those feet deserve their own attention. Each one contained cushioned fat pads that flattened on impact and rebounded on release. Fossilized trackways in Alaska show concentric rings where the pressure distributed evenly. The effect was graceful rather than thunderous. Unlike horse gallops, mammoth movement made the earth hum rather than shake. Against that stability, your smaller steps would feel nervous, quick, like a bird darting beside an ocean. If you looked at bones side by side, you'd see strength measured in geometry. A mammoth's femur is not only thicker, but shaped like an engineering column. Hollow core interior minimizing weight, while resisting bending moments. Its cortical bone is about twice as thick as in humans. Weight for weight, its femur could resist stresses that would snap a steel beam. You could leap, throw, or swing, but physics would ignore it. Even if you somehow struck that bone with full force, it wouldn't notice. A small fall that might bruise a person wouldn't register in an animal built to walk through glaciers. Their center of gravity sat deep between the shoulders, allowing tusk strikes and trunk movement without losing balance. For you, that means tactics like dodging, pushing, or circling would fail. Primitive hunters knew this instinctively. They never attacked a mammoth alone because it was physically impossible. Instead, they used terrain, tools, and timing. Pit traps, spears from a distance, cliffs, frozen rivers that turn mass against itself. When scientists model force output from a thrusting spear against hide, it takes momentum and leverage multiplied by several humans to breach. The hide itself could exceed 1 inch in thickness and hang under a fat layer insulating muscle, effectively natural armor. Even just breathing in its presence would feel different. The air vibrated from infrasonic rumbles as air moved through its sinuses. You might not hear much, but your ribs could sense the pulse. Elephants can produce frequencies under 20 hertz, and the similarity in skull resonance cavities shows mammoths did too. Sound was as much a pressure wave as a call, communication by vibration more than voice. For a single person near such a creature, it would feel like standing next to a moving wall of gravity. In strength comparisons, numbers verge on the abstract. A human can lift roughly half its body weight with moderate training. A mammoth's trunk alone could lift 300 kilograms with no strain. The total torque exerted by its shoulder muscles during digging or snow removal might exceed 40,000 Newton meters. Engineers like to joke that a single shrug from one could move a small car. Against that, the human frame reads as delicate, optimized not for power, but for tool use, for brains instead of brawn. Still, size doesn't mean clumsiness. Models based on joint articulation show mammoths could pivot gracefully within a few steps, adjusting footing across uneven terrain. Their skin included hair sensors that transmitted wind changes, improving balance in storms. Human dexterity seems little comfort when the ground shakes slightly from each of its steps. Hunters learned long ago that direct confrontation meant quick death. The only advantage humans held lay in distance and cooperation. Stone leverage multiplying fragile muscle. And even that was uncertain. Some carved bones show defensive injuries. Broken spear shafts embedded shallowly, healed long after, indicating most attempts didn't succeed. Early people understood this more through experience than calculation. Fighting a mammoth wasn't a duel. It was a negotiation with fear itself. When we look back now, it's hard not to feel small. And maybe that's the point. An animal that large makes measurement itself seem trivial. It reminds you that power doesn't need aggression. It just exists, breathing, chewing, walking. The Ice Age world balanced that energy like a slow metronome. Everything built to endure rather than outpace. And hey, subscribe if you want to. More boring facts are here whenever you need them. You'll always know where to find Keeper of Sleep when you can't sleep. So if you ever imagine that one-on-one meeting, your shadow beside a creature that could crush trees by leaning gently, whose heartbeats ran through the ground, it's not really a fight. It's a measure of perspective. The right response isn't confrontation. It's respect. Standing there, you'd feel no need to prove anything at all. Just the quiet truth of scale. One thin figure before ancient mass, separate, but sharing the same cold breath that still lingers somewhere in the frost beneath our feet. If you could stand on the mammoth step and listen, the first thing you'd notice is how empty it isn't. The air itself held a texture. A hush stretched thin between wind and ice, but full of movement waiting underneath. Sound traveled differently then. Cold air makes density rise, bending waves closer to the ground. That meant noise could travel miles, rolling low and slow across the horizon before fading into chill vapor. Paleoclimatologists reconstruct this by modeling temperature gradients across permafrost plains. With ground air often below freezing, even a footstep might echo farther than expected. That's why, when a mammoth herd moved in twilight, the vibration reached long before the shapes appeared. Low frequencies tend to move best through cold air because the molecules cluster tight, carrying deeper sound longer. The calls of mammoths have never been recorded, but the structure of their skulls offers a clue. Within that massive head were resonating chambers almost identical in shape and proportion to those of modern elephants. Those cavities work as amplifiers, allowing sound frequencies as low as 14 Hz, below what most human ears can detect. Acoustic models suggest woolly mammoths used infrasound too, sending long rumbles that could travel kilometers. These vibrations may have passed partly through the ground, picked up by sensitive tissues in their feet. Living elephants can sense such vibrations through mechanoreceptors. It's likely mammoths shared that trait. A herd might have conversed across snow valleys without raising a visible sound. To a person nearby, it might feel more than be heard. A deep pulse in the chest, soft pressure shifting against ribs, vanishing as soon as you notice. On warmer days, when air layers mixed unevenly, the tone could rise higher, perhaps audible as a drawn-out moan drifting between bodies. The physics of the Ice Age wind made everything slower, a kind of natural reverb stretching each note into an echo of itself. Smell built the other half of that world. Despite freezing temperatures, scents moved richly through the air. The steppes' vegetation, dry sedges, wormwood, yarrow, released resin and faint spice when trampled. Pollen analysis from preserved soils shows volatile oils similar to sage artemisia would have been common, giving a crisp herbal scent to the breeze. Where herds travelled, the smell thickened. Damp soil, aged dung, musk oil from glands beneath the tailbase. Modern elephants excrete these compounds when nervous or alert, and the chemical structures identified in mammoth hair samples suggest the same oily residues remained in their fur. You can reconstruct that smell by piece. A tinge of ammonia where snow melts through urine patches. Sweetness from crushed reindeer moss. Iron scent when wind lifts frozen dust off low soil. To predators, those odors were trail markers. To humans, they were orientation tools long before maps. Experimental archaeology in Siberia shows that hunter groups used scent and sound together, positioning downwind so mammoths couldn't detect human musk, waiting silently until the wind shifted. Inside frozen burrows and old dung deposits, biologists have also identified spores of fungi that live purely on decomposing herbivore waste. That means the smell of the Ice Age plain must have been constantly renewed. Fresh piles covering old ones, buffers of humus forming slowly under ice. It wasn't unpleasant, just steady, earthy, with undertones of acid snow and breathing hay. In that environment, nothing smelled clean in the modern sense. Everything held a trace of something else. Wind patterns, shaped by distant glaciers, swept across thousands of kilometers without barrier. The mammoth steppe was mostly treeless, so wind carried uninterrupted notes, whistling through tusks when a carcass lay bleached, humming through dry grass in thin harmony. At night, when temperature dropped sharply, frost crystals formed fine layers that tinkled like faint bells when feet disturbed them. These faint clinks, recorded during modern Arctic expeditions, recreate what people then must have heard each evening, the small music of frozen dust. For both animals and humans, sensing those vibrations wasn't decoration. It was survival. Wolves detected the shuffle of hooves before seeing silhouettes. Mammoths could feel an avalanche rumble through permafrost minutes before it reached them. Humans listened for rumbles that signaled herds approaching over ridges. Every movement played out in rhythm with the wind, a conversation entirely of physics and patience. If you imagine camping near such a herd, you might sit by faint embers of a fire. Smoke would rise straight before curving sideways with the wind. Each gust would bring a new layer of smell. The fat burning on ash, the lactic musk drifting from beasts nearby, the mineral breath of snow itself. Paleoclimate reconstructions using trapped air bubbles in ice cores show oxygen content and trace methane slightly higher then, meaning the air literally smelled fuller, warmer on the nose. Breathing felt heavier, almost audible. A mammoth herd resting nearby would make no coordinated noise, only shifting weight now and then, a crack of ice underfoot, tusks bumping softly together. Occasionally, one would exhale with a noise like wind released through a cave mouth. Steppe acoustics turned that sigh into a low wave moving outward, a signal of calm so deep it felt endless. Even carrion sounds were part of the background, the rasp of a distant raven, The brush of fur against snow crust, the whisper of frost breaking on stones. No single sound dominated. Everything blended into one steady frequency near silence. The Ice Age wasn't silent, but it made you slow down until you matched it. And hey, subscribe if you want to. More boring facts are here whenever you need them. You'll always know where to find Keeper of Sleep when you can't sleep. If you hold that world in your mind, the low resonance underfoot, the faint sage scent drifting through -30 air, the pulse of unseen movement somewhere beyond, it becomes a kind of living meditation. The senses overlap until they vanish into stillness. Breath vapor fading upward, snow hissing softly on its rest, and somewhere far away, too deep to hear, the last echo of a mammoth's call, rolling under the frozen ground. The silence that followed those echoes didn't happen all at once. When people talk about the mammoth's extinction, it's easy to imagine a sudden ending. One night they were there, the next morning they were gone. But the truth, measured carefully through carbon dates and DNA fragments, is slower. Their disappearance stretched across thousands of years, quiet and uneven, like snow melting under layers of cloud. On the mainland of Eurasia and North America, mammoths survived until about 10,000 years ago, at the very end of the Pleistocene epoch. That moment marked the last heartbeat of the Ice Age. Ice sheets that once covered Canada and northern Europe began to retreat. Global temperatures rose roughly 6 degrees Celsius in only a few millennia, a geological instant. This warming reshaped everything. The open steppe that had fed mammoths turned into wetlands, then forests. The grasses that had sustained them shrank in coverage by nearly half. Where herbs once dominated pollens trapped in sediment cores, birch and willow began to take over. You can read this transition almost like chapters in the ground. Layers dated to 12,000 years ago carry an abundance of grass pollen. After 11,000, the count plummets. That sharp switch tells ecologists more than fossils do. When the plants changed, the herbivores either adapted or vanished. Reindeer retreated north. Horses spread south. Mammoths, built for dry cold, found themselves trapped between heat and hunger. Humans had already entered that changing landscape. By then, our species occupied nearly every region mammoths had known. Archaeological sites across Ukraine, Siberia, and the American plains all show continued hunting into this final period. Tools more standardized, camps more permanent. Isotopic analysis of butchered bones shows they were taken in late summer and autumn, repeating signs of organized seasonal hunts. Still, scientists debate how much this really mattered. Computer models combining hunting rates with reproductive data suggest that even modest pressure from humans, removing 1% to 3% of adult females annually, could drive gradual decline over centuries. In modern elephant studies, similar losses cause population collapse because of long gestation times. Mammoths bred slowly, usually one calf every 4 to 6 years. They couldn't replace what was lost, but human spears weren't the only or even the main cause. Climate altered the mammoth's home at a deeper level. Higher rainfall turned tundra into muskeg, and permafrost began to thaw. Satellite data used to map ancient river systems show flooding expanded dramatically after 11,000 BCE. Steppe ground, once firm, grew soggy, forcing herds into narrower corridors. Some died in those bogs, leaving skeletons tilted and half buried in peat, a death recorded not by drama, but by sinking. Even so, small groups kept surviving in pockets. The most famous of these were on islands once connected to the mainland. On Wrangel Island, north of Siberia, mammoths lived until about 4,000 years ago, long after the pyramids of Egypt were built. Radiocarbon dating, verified by multiple laboratories, fixes their last known remains around 1650 BCE. They were cut off by rising seas and shrinking food supply, yet for nearly 6,000 years they endured there. Genetic analyses from well-preserved Wrangel bones reveal the cost of isolation. Compared to their continental ancestors, the island mammals had lost much of their genetic diversity. Their genomes show high loads of slightly harmful mutations, errors in olfactory genes, hair proteins, and reproductive enzymes. Scientists call this genomic meltdown, when a small population can't purge bad mutations faster than they appear. It doesn't mean sudden death. It means gradual weakening, individual by individual, until survival no longer keeps pace with decay. Some myths still linger about their end, especially the old image of mammoths found frozen mid-meal, mouths full of grass, as if an instant catastrophe struck. The truth is less cinematic. Those specimens, discovered in Siberia, didn't freeze in a single night. They died near floodplains, trapped or drowned, and were covered quickly by sediment that sealed them from oxygen. Later, freeze-thaw cycles hardened them like stone. The so-called fresh grass in their mouths is simply digested plant remains, preserved beautifully but slowly. The world loved the drama of flash-frozen legends, but the science points only to erosion, burial, and time. Climate continued shifting. Sea levels rose more than 70 meters during the early Holocene, rearranging coastlines, drowning grazing valleys, and isolating survivors on high plateaus. DNA from St. Paul Island in Alaska tells a similar story. Mammoths there lasted until about 5,600 years ago, then died suddenly when fresh water on the island ran out. Sediment cores show rising salt concentration exactly matching their disappearance. It's a precise, sad line on a graph. Extinction by thirst rather than violence. Everywhere else, the signs taper gently to silence. In continental Siberia, the youngest ivory fragments date to about 10,200 years ago. In continental Europe, tens of centuries earlier. North America's last mammoths left traces in the Great Lakes region as late as 9,700 BCE. After that, the bone layers end abruptly, replaced by peat and forest pollen. To scientists, the pattern feels familiar now. Climate stress, human proximity, diminishing genetic health. None alone explains everything, but together they trace a path toward the end. It wasn't one winter or one hunt. It was thousands of small pressures gathered slowly until the numbers fell below recovery. And yet, their disappearance didn't truly erase them. The permafrost kept them half present. Ivory surfacing after thaws, tissue still red under frost, DNA preserved down to single strands. Even as species vanish, pieces remain lodged in the Earth's memory. Each new thawing discovery adds another data point, confirming the same slow fade. And hey, subscribe if you want to. More boring facts are here whenever you need them. You'll always know where to find Keeper of Sleep when you can't sleep. If you want an image for that final moment, imagine a wind-scraped island under endless grey sky. Sparse grass, a stream shrinking to brine. The last mammoth lifts its trunk, scenting a breeze carrying only sea salt. Around it, silence. No herds, no predators, no sound but waves pushing dust across stone. It lowers its head again and breathes, once, twice, until breath and wind become the same thing. Then only the empty shore remains, waiting quiet, as the Ice Age exhales its very last breath. What the cold takes, it also keeps. Long after the last mammoth vanished from living herds, the frost began its quiet work of storage, holding them exactly as they fell. It sealed lungs, hair, even eyelashes inside soil that never thawed deeply enough to decay. Every layer became a vault, one that waited until science grew patient enough to open it. Most of these treasures came from northern Yakutia, where the permafrost dives hundreds of meters deep. The constant sub-zero temperature, often below -10 degrees Celsius all year, prevents bacteria and oxygen from finishing their usual digestion. That's why entire mammoth bodies still emerge with skin intact, fur clinging to shoulders, and blood cells visible under microscopes. They aren't fossils, they're mummies. The first famous discovery of this kind happened in 1799, when a hunter named Olenyog near the Lena River found a massive carcass protruding from riverbank ice. Local people collected the tusks. The body eventually reached scientists in St. Petersburg decades later. Since then, dozens more have appeared. Each is slightly different, but together they outline the same miracle of preservation. Cold mixed with fine silt, a lack of oxygen, and quick burial. Among the best known is Liuba, the baby mammoth found by reindeer herder Yuri Kudi in 2007 on the Yamal Peninsula. She was about 1 month old when she died, roughly 42,000 years ago, likely trapped in mud near a river. When researchers examined her, they discovered milk residue still inside her stomach, along with traces of pollen and silt. Proof she inhaled water moments before death. Her body remained so complete that CT scans revealed internal organs, capillaries, even the structure of her tongue. She's the most perfectly preserved mammoth ever found. Another is Yuka, discovered in Yakutia in 2010. A juvenile roughly 10 years old. Portions of her fur still lay flattened against the soil, and fractures on one tusk suggest scavengers gnawed her long ago. Radiocarbon tests date her to around 39,000 years BP. Compared with Liuba, Yuka's tissues showed oxidation damage. A slight warming period had touched her resting place, but collagen fibers intact enough that scientists could study their elasticity. Even older is the Adams mammoth, excavated in 1806 near the Lena Delta, yielding the first reliable reconstruction of mammoth anatomy. That carcass provided hair samples, whose microscale structure later became the baseline for all comparisons. Under scanning microscopes, woolly mammoth hair reveals hollow cores for insulation, surrounded by keratin layers coated in natural oil to resist moisture. Chemical mapping shows stable carbon and nitrogen ratios identical to those found in cold-adapted camels and musk oxen. Every strand recorded climate like a thin diary of its life. In the laboratory, preservation becomes information. Scientists cut small slivers from muscle and bone, washing them in sterile solutions to extract microscopic crystals of DNA. The extreme cold slows molecular decay so well that sequences tens of thousands of years old remain legible. Through these fragments, researchers from Stockholm University and the Max Planck Institute assembled several complete mammoth genomes, templates now stored digitally. Comparing them to modern Asian elephants revealed about 1 million genetic differences, including those responsible for thick hair, altered hemoglobin for sub-zero oxygen binding, and reduced ear size. But beyond genetics, the mummies whisper about environment. Stable isotope analysis of their tissues shows the chemical balance of the air they breathed and the plants they ate. Oxygen-18 ratios mirror seasonal changes, higher in warm summers, lower in long winters. Nitrogen levels mark nutritional stress. When food was scarce, isotope signatures shift upward. Combining those readings from dozens of samples built a year-by-year climate archive covering the late Pleistocene. It's like reading weather reports written by bone. Inside dried blood vessels, microbiologists have found remnants of ancient microbes, not living, but still structured enough to study. Their DNA resembles that of soil bacteria, adapted to cold and iron-rich environments. By sequencing these fragments, scientists reconstructed partial microbiomes of the mammoth gut, identifying lactic acid species similar to those in modern herbivores. Even traces of intestinal parasites remain intact as cysts visible under microscopes, confirming diseases common to Ice Age grazers. The chemistry of preservation comes down to three things: temperature, sediment, and speed. When carcasses froze within days, anaerobic bacteria never had time to consume tissue. Ice crystals wrapped cells like armor, halting decay molecules halfway through their reactions. Scientists describe this process as cryostatic entrapment. Not true freezing of water inside tissue, but a stable metastate kept below zero for geologic time. It's why fat tissues still look yellow when exposed after 40 millennia. From those tissues come stories even finer than sight could give. Lipid analysis finds unique wax esters in mammoth fat, suggesting built-in antifreeze properties similar to Arctic fish oils. These compounds lowered melting points, keeping fat semi-solid at -40 degrees Celsius. It's evidence of biochemical adaptation far beyond simple fur and size. Many mummies also reveal cause of death. Some show clear trauma: broken limbs, snapped spines, or trapped positions implying collapse into ice holes. Others died peacefully, folded sideways as if resting. In one specimen near the Kolyma River, the trunk ended in a frozen grasp around tundra grass, hinting it fell while feeding. Another reminder that accidents, not predators, ended many great lives. As thawing permafrost accelerates today, new finds emerge yearly. Residents of Yakutia and Chukotka report ivory and frozen tissue surfacing after summer floods. Scientists rush to retrieve them before modern bacteria destroy what the ice preserved. Each rescue adds to a museum of cold memory. Rooms filled with glass cases where air stays refrigerated. Hair still holding a sheen. Tusks still bearing ancient polish from use. When you step back from the microscopes, it's hard not to feel that these animals never entirely left. In their veins of ice and fragments of code, the texture of an ancient world still hums quietly. Coal turned muscle into message, fat into notebook, fiber into timeline. The freeze never meant oblivion. It meant pause. A memory held steady for 40,000 years until we learned how to listen. The permafrost, patient as always, kept the story intact. The tale of warmth preserved by unimaginable cold. After seeing how perfectly the coal kept them, it's tempting to wonder what happens if we warm them again. Not literally, but genetically. Once, discovery meant unearthing fossils and naming bones. Now, it digs deeper, threading molecules back into patterns of life. The question has become both astonishing and uneasy. Could the mammoth ever walk again? The possibility took root in the early 2000s, when geneticists began reading entire mammoth genomes from frozen remains found in Siberia. Among the most visible advocates was George Church of Harvard University, founder of the Woolly Mammoth Revival Project, and later collaborator with biotech startup Colossal Biosciences. Their idea wasn't to clone a mammoth outright. That technology still lies out of reach. but to create a living hybrid by editing the DNA of its closest living relative, the Asian elephant. Using CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing tools, they proposed inserting mammoth genes into elephant cells, reintroducing traits like long hair, fat metabolism, and cold-adapted blood proteins. CRISPR functions like digital text editing for genomes, a molecular scalpel guided by short RNA sequences capable of locating precise genetic addresses. When researchers applied it to elephant DNA, they targeted over 60 genes likely critical for Arctic adaptation. Laboratory studies in Boston and Seoul have already implanted versions of these altered cells into elephant skin cultures, producing visible signs of enhanced fat synthesis and hair growth. Nothing close to an embryo yet, but conceptually, the path exists. The biological challenges, however, are immense. No one has successfully cloned a full elephant, and the gestation period, nearly 2 years, makes experimentation extraordinarily slow. Elephant females are endangered and rare. Subjecting them to invasive reproductive procedures raises ethical problems even before success rates enter the conversation. Scientists have proposed artificial wombs or synthetic uterine systems as alternatives, engineering amniotic environments to simulate elephant pregnancy in controlled chambers. So far, these systems can sustain only early mammalian embryos for weeks, not months. Then comes gene expression. Inserting mammoth DNA may not yield mammoth results. Genetic context matters. Temperature-related genes rely on regulatory networks, timing, and cellular signals that evolve differently in true mammoths. Mixing them into elephant genomes risks unpredictable outcomes. Not a mammoth resurrected, but an experimental hybrid shaped partly by human intent. There's also the ecological puzzle. Advocates of so-called Pleistocene rewilding argue that bringing cold-adapted elephants into Arctic tundra could help restore grasslands. By trampling snow, they might expose soil and promote grass regrowth, slowing permafrost thaw and capturing carbon. Early computer models by Siberian ecologists, inspired by observations in the Pleistocene Park project near Chersky, show that large herbivores indeed alter ground albedo, its reflectivity, potentially cooling the surface slightly. But applying that to an engineered species remains speculative. Critics point out practical dangers, fragile climates, biosafety risks, and questions of asylum for animals built in labs with no natural lineage. Even if we could recreate a cold-tolerant elephant, what environment would welcome it? The Ice Age steppe has long turned to forest and wetland. Modern tundra holds new species, new pathogens, new climate rhythms. Introducing experimental herbivores might unsettle systems already stressed by warming trends. The moral dimension weighs even heavier. Philosophers and conservationists debate whether extinction deserves reversal. When species vanish through natural and historic processes, do we preserve memory or rewrite history by reviving them? Some call it restoration, others see interference, a refusal to accept impermanence. In journals and conferences, you can trace both voices merging into one long question. Should we, just because we can? Museum curators often hear visitors ask what it would feel like to see a mammoth alive again. Scientists answer carefully. They speak of feasibility timelines, possibly decades away if ever, and of responsibility. Recreating a mammoth's body would also mean rebuilding its world. Herds, migration space, companions, diet, and cold that no longer truly exists. The steppe that shaped them has melted into history. Without that context, the resurrection becomes theatre rather than biology. Still, research continues. Colossal Biosciences in Texas reported in 2024 that it had produced elephant cells with up to 30 mammoth genes integrated successfully. They refer to the potential creature as a mammothant. The phrase itself feels tentative, half memory, half invention. Their goal, they say, is ecological restoration through de-extinction technology that might later save living species. Skeptics remain unconvinced, cautioning that the billions spent reviving the past might do more good protecting today's elephants, whose own future looks dimmer each year. You can see both sides. There's wonder in reaching hands back through 40 millennia of ice to touch something once lost, and caution in realizing that history carries silence for a reason. The science has already given us what truly matters: a complete genetic record, a library of adaptation, a story now safe from oblivion. Making flesh again might only blur the clarity that extinction leaves behind, a boundary marking the limit of what life can endure. And hey, subscribe if you want to. More boring facts are here whenever you need them. You'll always know where to find Keeper of Sleep when you can't sleep. If you picture that last artifact, the frozen heart of a mammoth resting under permafrost, and the lab lights glinting from its DNA sequence on a screen, it's easy to mistake possibility for destiny. But maybe memory is enough. The ice has preserved what it could. Perhaps what remains belongs to quiet observation, not revival. A lesson that some silences shouldn't be broken, even with the gentlest of tools. What's left of them now fits mostly in drawers. Bone by bone, tusk by polished tusk, the mammoth remains scattered across museum archives on every continent, catalogued in trays and tagged with dates longer than written history. Some lie in public halls under glass. Others rest deep in storage, wrapped in grey paper where the temperature stays constant. And yet, their presence feels larger than any exhibit. It hums quietly under everything we know about deep time. Each specimen still feeds discovery. Inside those tusks, scientists piece together year-by-year growth patterns used to chart ancient climate. Carbon and oxygen isotope lines mark seasons, droughts, and migrations, forming biological calendars stretching back 50,000 years. When combined with pollen data and ice core records, those signals help reconstruct the exact pace of Pleistocene warming. Evidence that now informs modern climate models. The mammoth, even gone, still contributes equations to predict our own future. Museums in St. Petersburg, London, and Washington, D.C. hold some of the largest collections. In drawers under the Smithsonian, mammoth molars sit beside those of extinct mastodons, each ridge pattern distinct. Researchers still compare enamel wear to infer diet changes during global cooling cycles. Elsewhere, frozen tissue samples reside in cryogenic banks, shared internationally for genetics work that once sounded impossible. These archives act as slow conversation among generations of scientists. Prehistoric elephants speaking through data to modern climatologists, biochemists, and ecologists. But beyond the laboratories, the mammoth never really left us. Their image follows culture like a shadow through time. Paleolithic artists carved them from ivory. Centuries later, children sketch them in storybooks. They've stood as symbols of wilderness, of lost grandeur, and sometimes of inevitability. In languages across Eurasia, the word for mammoth still anchors metaphors: immovable, ancient, enduring. Even the name traces to the Mansi language of Western Siberia. Mang-ont, earthhorn, an echo of northern imagination meeting natural evidence. Modern art still reaches for them. Sculptors reproduce the curve of tusks in steel. Photographers document melting permafrost, exposing real ivory, a ghost returning through ground that no longer freezes. For Arctic communities, mammoth ivory remains a real economy, legally tradable fossil ivory shaped into carvings, its patterns known as Schrieger lines, spiraling like tree rings. Each piece carries not only artistry, but a reminder that the ice beneath our feet still releases secrets from before humanity's long memory. Science draws practical lessons from their end. The careful study of how mammoths disappeared gives paleobiologists a model for modern extinction triggers. The interplay between climate stress and slow reproduction. Their story underlies present-day conservation policy, guiding protection for elephants, rhinos, and other megafauna. When biologists say large animals vanish first under environmental change, they speak from mammoth data. It's an ongoing instruction in fragility, that abundance across continents doesn't equal permanence. Even geologically, they remain teachers. The carbon locked in old tusks helps calibrate radiocarbon dating beyond 40,000 years. The distribution of their remains maps Ice Age river systems long since hidden under soil. When research teams trace ancient isotope trails, they find echoes of permafrost shifts that predict ours today. The mammoth, without knowing it, became a natural recorder of planetary rhythm. And their quiet message runs deeper than science. Every fossil species offers a measure against human time, but mammoths sit uniquely close, late enough that the cave drawings still show our meeting, early enough that we can't truly touch them again. They balance on the edge between prehistory and memory. Looking at them, it's easy to feel patience rising, the sense that life endures in cycles far longer than our own. Philosophers sometimes say extinction is an ultimate form of transformation, not just loss. In that sense, the mammoth turned into knowledge itself, its tissues converted into climate graphs, its bones into museum maps, its image into gentleness remembered. What began as body became data, myth, and warning all at once. Still, the emotional note that lingers most isn't tragedy. It's the still sort of respect you feel when something vast ends naturally after fulfilling its design. In their extinction, the mammoths mark the close of an age, allowing new forests, rivers, and species to unfold. Even absence has a role in continuity.